Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. We're moving into modernism, which is our next literary movement. And before we do so, let's just stop and take a moment to reflect upon where we've been, which was realism. That was the period in American literature from the Civil War to World War One. What did we see when we had realism? I hope you remember this word. We will see it again. Verisimilitude. What does it mean in relationship to writing? How well does the writing resemble the truth? And this is a good way to remember what the authors of realism were working to achieve. They wanted their writing to be like a picture without any authorial, painting or changing the world as it was. They wanted to give a true and accurate presentation. And they did that by removing themselves from their writing and giving the reader an objective view. So they were presenting objectivity, right? That's when you remove yourself from the work. As we move into modernism, we're going to see things change, and we're going to see them change dramatically. So you can see here that we have between the wars, in between the First World War and then the Second World War, this is known as modernism. Now, you see here on this slide kind of the representation, the visual of cogs in a machine. This is meant to represent that with modernism, it wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just two things, it was different things, and they were all, working off each other that gave us this very diverse period of American literature. So it has its origins in influential thinkers, science and technology, as well as the First World War. And it's always important, just like we saw with the overview for realism, that history and the times are reflected in the writing. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the influential thinkers for modernism. Okay, the background for these first influential thinkers, as well as all of them for modernism, is kind of a holdover from realism. We saw with the incredible influx of immigrants into America in between the Civil War and the First World War, the incredible growth of the cities. This is what we call urbanism. That's going to continue. Now, we see in the bottom left, this is Karl Marx. Most people are familiar with Karl Marx. He wrote the Communist Manifesto as well as Das Kapital. And he viewed workers like workers on the line in the factory as just cogs in a machine, right? And they were being mistreated. He wanted a new revolution, an economic revolution, to redistribute economic power to those who produce it. Those are the workers. And when we hit the First World War, that's when Russia underwent the communist revolution and became a communist country that is the Soviet Union. Of course, the Soviet Union was to fall many decades later and then switch back over into Russia. Then bottom right, this is where we have Charles Darwin. Most folks are familiar with him, with his book, The Origin of the Species and the Theory of Evolution. Within, Charles Darwin took a look at life and explained it without reference to divine laws or divine purpose, right? That life is a struggle and it's a survival of the fittest. So this resulted in a loss of faith within many people and a sense of doubt regarding faith. Looking at some more influential thinkers, we encounter a psychiatrist, a philosopher, and a scientist. I'm sure you're familiar from general psychology, Sigmund Freud and his works, which stressed the importance of the subconsciousness. For example, the dreams that we have and how important they are, as well as the hidden drive of sex in our lives that results in a lot of the actions that we undertake, whether we acknowledge it and are aware of it or not. He came up with the terms the id, the ego, and the superego, and they, in essence, become modernity's new trinity. The works of Sigmund Freud resulted in a relaxed sexual morality, a much more open society, and increasingly informal behavior. Friedrich Nietzsche was over in Europe, and he wrote about what he titled the superhuman or the Übermensch. And this is an individual who refused to be shackled, refused to be bound to society's forms and norms, such as Christianity, being loyal to the state here being government, faith in science, as well as middle class comfort and progress. And you can see that these ideas of these influential thinkers are kind of bouncing off each other, and they're really not agreeing. Nietzsche saw that the world really lacked overarching laws that were transcendental, and he had a very negative look at the massive society. And as well, in his works, he claimed that God is dead. Yeah, so you can see that we're really kind of moving into a different direction than Einstein with his scientific discoveries, especially with the theory of relativity. It proved that time and space are dependent upon or relative to an observer. So there's no truths. And he came up with a lot of thought experiments. I don't know if you've ever taken physics and read or heard a lecture of the theory of relativity. Of course, it's not really part in an English class, but it's really fascinating. And his works in science became applicable to the everyday world of people. And therein, science really kind of shook things up, shook up the little snow globe, and displaced man and his understanding of the world and his relationship therein. So we take those influential thinkers, Karl Marx, right? Darwin, Freud, Nietzsche, and Einstein, and they're working, and all of the stuff therein, right, is going to interact with what we'll see in the next slide, which is advancements in science technology, that we'll begin with in the next lecture.